Hi, everybody. I'm very happy today to be joined by my friends, long-term friends and long-term colleagues, Kevin Frank and Caryn McHose. Kevin Frank is a certified advanced Rolfer, a certified Rolf movement practitioner, and a Rolf movement instructor for the Dr. Ida Rolf Institute. Caryn McHose is a certified advanced Rolfer and certified Rolf movement practitioner, as well as a somatic experiencing practitioner and a certified biodynamic cranial practitioner. We're here today to continue a conversation that we've been having for probably 30 years. And it's about movement. It's about how we move. It's about who we are and how that who we are informs how we move. And we will be talking, our conversation is very much informed by the principles of Rolf movement and very, very much informed by the work of Hubert Godard, who is a French movement specialist, a dancer, a researcher, and whose work has inspired us for many, many years and inspired Rolfers and doctors and psychologists and yoga teachers and dancers for many, many years. And so we've been talking with each other for years about this, and we're going to try and start today at the beginning to include you all in the conversation. And Kevin, would you like to start and give us a little, let us know how the two-way orientation with movement works for you?
We're talking today about the subject of orientation or gravity orientation. And this is a very good place to start the conversation when we're talking about what allows movement to change, what allows behavior to change, because our behaviors are not meant to be fiddled with casually. That wouldn't be a good idea for people or any creature to just have their behavior suddenly change in the middle of a situation. But sometimes over time, we realize there are habits, and we'd really like to find a way where we can open the doorway for people to step into more of their potential by having new options. And Lael mentioned this wonderful man who we've all worked with, Hubert Godard, and he introduced us to a new way of thinking about gravity and a new way of thinking about gravity orientation. So we're going to speak with each other today about this topic of how do we begin to think about habits of behavior, and how do we think about the potential for people to change their habits of behavior. And that's really the reason we want to talk about orientation or gravity orientation, which we'll explain in a moment, is because we're all in the business of trying to help people change things that haven't changed already. And it pays to know why things are more likely to change under certain circumstances than others. That's a big piece of what we would like the people who listen to what we say, who read what we write, to understand is there's a reason why sometimes people are more successful with changing movement habits and other behaviors. So if we start back at the beginning of the beginning, it is fair to say that all creatures, all plants have a function that informs them about what's going on, what's important at the moment. And that function has to be automatic, because if we had to do it with our thinking brain, it would be too slow and it would be too late. So we've all come to this place of being modern human beings, and going on inside us are two different brains. One that is about thinking. It's called the representational brain. The other is about how the organism knows what the status of things are automatically. And that's called the sensory motor brain. So we call the sensory motor brain, for user-friendly purposes, the movement brain. So there's this part of our brain that is not conscious. And then there's the part of our brain that has to do with all the things that we think about, that we make meaning of, memory. And those two brains have an interaction. And I think it's fair to say that we have a really agreed upon feeling that you want those two brains to have good conversations with each other. When you have a good interrelational situation between the movement brain and the thinking brain, suddenly a lot of the issues that plague us as people, especially modern people, can be better solved. And so just to say that there's a lovely French neuroscientist who passed away in 2007 named Jacques Paillard. And he spent his life trying to get psychologists and neuroscientists to be able to talk to each other, because many times specialists don't have a way to bridge their interdisciplinary gap. And so he came up with a model that he thought would be very good with us. And I just want to add that to this first introduction. He calls the things that go on in the sensory motor brain, the movement brain, the part that's automatic, he calls that part concerned with where, W-H-E-R-E, where as spatial relationships. The location, not, oh, I'm in New Jersey or I'm in New Hampshire, but at a deep level, oh, I'm in a room that's this shape, that has this much space above it, and I'm right here. And I know that I'm right here because my sensory motor brain tells me a sense of weight. And I know that something over there is there because my sensory motor brain senses distance. So those things are very useful for us to learn about. And we call the learning about how to use these things, how to use our conscious awareness to have an effect on the movement brain, we call that working with gravity orientation. Gravity, because it has to do with these very deep things the body needs to know, a sense of weight and a sense of distance or space. Once we find here, we can find there. And it's orientation, because this is so fundamental to the survival of my body, the survival of everybody's body. And because it's so important, when we catch the attention of the movement brain by consciously noticing, oh, how do I feel a sense of weight? Where do I feel a sense of weight? Or how do I feel the way in which the space around me is shaped, occupied, how much space there is? Many other ways of doing this, but when we pay attention consciously to the sense of weight and the sense of space, we're working with something we call gravity orientation.
Thank you, Kevin. So we're like I said, we're starting at the beginning, and each one of us is going to kind of give the way that we explain this when we teach classes or work with clients. And then we're going to talk about it a little bit. I'm going to go next. So Kevin has said a lot already, and I would also refer any or all of you to the website that Kevin and Caryn have. Kevin has written many articles. They have written a book together. Caryn has participated in 2 other books, and in a lot of the articles and in their book, you will find more information about this as well. So before we move, we prepare to move. And that the way that we prepare to move will determine the movement. All right. So And we prepare to move. For starters, the preparation of movement it has to do with something very simple, which is staying upright in gravity. If I extend my arm in front of me, that changes the way my body organizes in gravity. And so before I make that movement, my body has to orchestrate the entire balance system and the entire coordination and anti-gravity system so that when I hold my arm out, I don't fall forward on my face. All right, so there's a constant orchestra that's going on in our body before every movement. And it is largely unconscious because it has to be, otherwise we do nothing else. Now, so we prepare to move. That is a function of our gravity system, of our spatial brain. And that preparation to move also is very deeply connected to perception and emotion, because my body will change and my movement will change depending on the context in which I think I am moving. So the example that I like to give is, it's a very different, if you imagine yourself at the door to a room where you're about to go in and get, have your PhD exam, and you've got 5 people sitting up there to ask you tough questions about your work. You're going to have a very different quality of tonus in your body, preparation and movement into that room than you will into the room where you are going to meet some of your very, very best friends for dinner, and you feel completely at ease and comfortable and joyous about the meeting, right? All you have to do is imagine that, and you can get a sense of the way your body prepares. So our body prepares for movement. It prepares for movement so that we will stay upright in gravity, and it prepares for movement according to the way we perceive the context that we are moving in. Okay, and according to Hubert Godard, our body, it has two main sources of information that it uses to prepare that movement. And one of them is the ground, and one of them is space. And space is the context. What is out there? What are we moving into? And the ground is really what supports us. Where's ground? Where's gravity? Now, these two orientations, ideally, they're balanced. So when I go to make a movement, I have a sense of the ground, I have a sense of support from gravity, and I have a sense of really being able to open and move into the context that I'm going into, move through space, move to another person, move to the place that I'm going, right? As it happens, however, most of us have a preference. Let's call it that preference. That preference comes from habits, it comes from constitution, and it also comes from situations that specifically inhibit that orientation. So, for example, if I suffered a big fall and I was injured in that, I may stop trusting the ground. So I may orient more to space. I may use my eyes more to orient and to give me the sense of where I'm going than I do the ground, all right? Or, for example, activities that we do with our body. If I am a martial artist, I probably have a lot of sense of the ground and maybe less sense of space. Martial arts tend to bring me down. A dancer will have an orientation maybe up and out more. So our activities, our sense of ourselves, our trauma history, all of those come together to give us that preference towards one or the other of these orientations. Now, when those orientations balance, as we prepare to move, we draw equally from ground and from space, then what happens is grace. What happens is a quality of movement emerges in which we have a lengthening of the spine and an opening of the joints that we're preparing to move through. We have ease, we have comfort, and we have that marvelous and somewhat undefinable quality that we call grace. So, yeah, I think that's where I'm going to stop for now. Caryn.
Yeah, I think where the stitch that I want to pick up is what's it like to attend to this pre-movement? What do you do when you're combing, using your attention to become really curious about how you feel, discover, play with pre-movement? How do you start to be curious about noticing weight and contact with ground, and how you equally begin to notice your sense of space and the different senses that can also harvest information. And that this takes time. I think the point I want to make is pre-movement is something that one can luxuriate in and be really curious about finding and noticing the information coming to you. So you really have to stop and feel. So a lot of times you hear people say, well, get really grounded. So that's a word that we can then drop into our body and find out and be curious about what really does that feel like. And in that foray, in using your imagination to find words to represent what the experience, your body happening, what's happening in your body is wordless. It's this non-conscious information that's always going on that allows us to move and be at ease. And as you spend the time noticing weight, as I'm doing right now, I'm noticing the cushion that I'm sitting in. I'm noticing I'm slightly leaning towards Kevin and towards Lael, and I'm imagining an audience out there that might also become curious about their experience of their seat, or maybe you're standing right now. And that journey can be sustained enough that you start to notice where you might like to have more information, to feel more deeply the profound support that you receive from surrendering how you've been using your body to maybe hold yourself up through habits or injury, and how that process of surrendering and widening the experience of how the gravity response serves us to support our orientation to space and weight can be liberated to express more of that flow that Lael was speaking about. And there's something about somatic imagination that Hubert used to say to us, that we're exercising our imagination because we're imagining everything. But when we're hanging out to be curious about, in the moment before I move, what are the choices in terms of weight and space that I'm making, I have that opportunity to find out what information is my body more hungry for, to get the full extent of that gracious expression. And it might be, I really am not fully feeling the contact on the floor with my feet, or feeling my rami or my sits bones landed in the chair. And for me, I take it further and realizing, oh, there's 4 legs on the chair that are supporting. As soon as I can imagine those legs down there, so that I have 6 legs, my own 2 feet, and the 4 on the chair, I feel a softening in my body. Wow, there's a lot of support there. So there's something about developing the capacity to sustain perception, to harvest the information of ground and space, and that opens a new option for how we move in terms of our motor patterns. And I guess I simply wanted to do this was one of the ways that I learned how fundamental this is, how foundational understanding more about the gravity response is that the prime directive of the gravity response in the body is don't fall down. So I tumbled to the ground because that sense of gravity keeps us from not falling down. And that's the topic that we want to continue to illuminate for you to be curious about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would also say was, you know, or circle back around to is when we want to change movement, we really work with the pre-movement. And the pre-movement brain, as Kevin says, it doesn't respond to commands very well. You know, say, breathe deep. No, throw your shoulders back, chin in. It doesn't respond to commands. It can momentarily respond to commands, but to really touch the ground of movement, which is also the ground of being, we do it with different orientations. We do it, as Caryn says, by slowing down, by filling in, by getting curious about what are the choices that I'm making, and are there different choices? You know, if I go to push off the ground, you know, when I go to start walking, I can push off the ground, or I can be drawn to that place that I'm moving from. And I may do more of one, I may do more of the other. If I'm only drawn to the place that I'm moving, I'm likely to trip over the irregularities in the ground. And if I'm only pushing off the ground, I'm go under a bush and it's likely to take my hat off because I'm not aware of what's above me. So giving that new information, and that's done with image, it's done with sentiment, it's done with poetry and imagination. Hubert Goddard talks about building the direction that you have less of. And by building, he means it's really an exercise of imagination and filling into the imagination and the image and the being. And when we do that, as we prepare to move, a very different quality of movement emerges. It's much easier to change a movement in the moment we prepare for it than when it has already started. Do either of you do you want to say something about that, Kevin? I see you nodding your head.
Well, I was appreciating all that you're saying, Lael, helping to color in this topic of pre-movement, which both you and Caryn spoke about. And I love that you brought up the way in which the movement brain doesn't respond to command. And so I want to hearken back to the model of Paillard, the other Frenchman, Jacques Paillard, just to say, he posits that the sensory motor brain is about where, meaning where it's hungry, as Caryn said, for information that's in the moment and that can be directly sensed, as opposed to the representational brain. That's what he calls the thinking brain. And the representational brain, whether it's conscious, subconscious, or unconscious, it's all part of the representational brain. It all makes meaning, it all draws on memory. It's interested in what? So you have the where and you have the what. And generally speaking, finding, as Lael so beautifully put, the poetry of the where, or as Caryn was demonstrating, really being in the immediacy of the predicament at a sensory level. Both of those speak very deliciously to the movement brain. And see for yourself whether commands or speaking to, will do it a little bit more thisly to a movement student or client, or anyone working with trying to help people change behavior. It goes, if it goes into the representational brain, the effect is going to be quite limited because we can't effort ourselves to move smoothly. We can't effort ourselves to have more elongation in the body. We have to evoke it, as Lael was talking about and Caryn demonstrated. We evoke it through language, through the feeling of it in my body as I invite you to notice weight in your body. I need to feel weight in my own body. So movement brain of one person communicates with movement brain of another person much better than representational brain. The what brain communicates to the where brain, because the where brain goes, yeah, you've just caused a lot of mischief. It doesn't have words, but typically it's the representational brain that is often involved in the impediments to our movement.
I wanted to add to that what brought up with, for me, is in working with either clients or students, is my desire is to support a person, kind of a midwife, for supporting someone to notice when they're in representational and to support them to bring that curiosity and that quality to what's happening in the felt sense in relation to ground and space. And, you know, that takes sometimes some shepherding because, you know, we don't grow up being invited to notice, you know, how do you notice the ground or how do you notice the space, and lingering there to give us the time, the seconds that it takes to climb out of the thinking process, the representational, to the silent world of sensation and dwell there long enough so that we can feel it in our bodies and then possibly become curious from that place to find a word that is inclusive of the experience in the body and offering the word that it's like, so that someone again can share, and that wholeness of the representational, the meaning making process that's so vital to us. But we have our body saying it too. And that journey with clients and students and within my own self is what is dynamic and creative and helps me slow down and be present in a whole other way with myself and with people and with my context.
Yeah, it seemed, you know, there's such a beautiful paradox there, because for us to really change the way we are moving, we have to change something about the way we are being, you know, and conversely, if there's something we really want to change about our being or our way of relating to the world, sometimes finding a new way of moving is a much simpler way of doing it than doing 10 years of therapy, for example. 10 years of therapy also helps, but sometimes just that key to a different way of being, it's right there in my movement. And when I give my movement some more different information, then something different flows out of me. And that something different that flows out of me pulls the change that I have been wanting to realize, not only in my movement, but in my being, in the way that I am in the world, in the way I consider myself in the world, in the way I relate to others. So we're going to talk now a little bit about how do we work with this with our clients and students. And And we'll do that. And then at the very end, Caryn is going to lead us through a movement exploration to really help us feel that, have a lived experience of it in our bodies. So Kevin, do you want to start with talking about how you work with this with your clients and your students?
Thank you, Lael. The challenge with working with people who are new to working with perception, that's kind of the realm that we've outlined here. Perception being the processes by which we're interpreting the raw, to whom it may concern, activity around us. Perception, whether it's in the body or outside the body, perception is a way of noticing and then assembling an impression. And so working with perception, for many people, they want to believe in it, but at first they're quite skeptical because they want to be fixed. And all of us have spent time in the body therapy profession. And so what seems to be my general approach is to start with things that are quite simple and have people be successful with noticing how a tiny shift of perception, a tiny shift in what the person's noticing in preparation to move, how that is something they can feel. So there's two things they have to do in that first challenge. One is notice, and the second is feel what happens when they start to move after they notice. And so Caryn alluded to this. It takes some spaciousness in the interaction with someone. And usually that has a lot to do with helping a person settle into a place. So settling has something to do with weight orientation, but not everybody's going to go, okay, let yourself feel weight in your body. You start with places, where is it easiest? Or where is it easy for you to notice a little bit of weight or a little bit of loading or a little bit of settling someplace? And if they can't feel it in their body, I might say, well, can you see something in the room that looks settled, that has weight? So whatever it takes to make it available for people to begin to be successful. And I think that's huge, because otherwise they will go, yeah, oh yeah, I feel a difference, and so on and so forth. But unless they have an authentic, genuine experience that this matters, maybe first because I've said why this stuff works, but more because they feel something in their body shift, as Lael was saying, to feel the movement a little different. And because there's someone there just waiting to say, and how do you notice it's different? With these little questions, again, as I'm feeling it in my body, they may begin to have some sense of success, some sense that they can participate in this, even though it feels much more subtle than they'd like someone to be doing in some instances. They might want you to do something dramatic, something that feels like you're making them better. But once enrolled, then I think we have a chance that they will continue to be curious enough that they're going to explore the unknown. Because as Caryn pointed out, we don't learn about doing this sensory noticing, the weight and space stuff. We didn't receive that, most of us, in our education or in our culture. So it seems we have to find an entry point for people.
Yeah, and I would, we've been talking a lot about ground orientation, And I want to talk some also about space orientation and how do we work with that. And space orientation has a lot to do with the way we use our sense organs. Okay, how do we use our eyes? How do we use our ears? How do we use our nose? Hubert Godard talks a lot about hapticity is the quality of receiving the information with our sense organs. It's a two-way process. We receive the information with our sense organs, and yet we also organize our body to get that information more, or what he calls defensive hapticity, to not receive that information. So, so somebody in the next room is calling and I can almost hear them, but then I'm going to cock my ear. And then that would be part of the active movement of perception, whereas the passive movement of perception is the fact that my ears are hearing it. So we have those two qualities. And sometimes what happens is that I use that, instead of cocking my ear to hear the person, what they're saying, I actually pull back and I shut down in my ear because I don't want to hear. One time many years ago, I had a fight with my boyfriend on the telephone and he yelled at me and hung up on me. This is 40 years ago. And I can remember I stopped hearing in that ear for a few days. So that would be a perfect example of defensive, temporary defensive hapticity. And of course, the way that we use our sense organs has everything to do with the way we move into space. Let's imagine I had a bicycle accident and I hit the ground with the right side of my face. And so I may pull away from information or stimulus that comes into the right side. And that, of course, will affect the way that I move into this whole right area of my kinesphere, or don't move. As I go to move forward, I may pull a little to the left to avoid that. And that, of course, sets up a whole series of changes and alterations in my body. If every time I prepare to move, I avoid my right side in the pre-movement, that will set up a torsion in my whole body. Very often we find, for example, clinically, that with scoliosis, a lateral curvature of the spine, there is very often a significant inhibition, or in Hubert Godard's word, defensive hapticity onto one side of the body that we're pulling away from, or that we have gone exclusively into one orientation, to space orientation or ground orientation. A couple more things I would say about that is that, when, to push, to have boundaries, to say no, we have to have ground, okay? And to reach to others and to connect with others, we have to have space orientation. And so, so sometimes you're working with somebody who has a really hard time setting a boundary. Go to the feet, go to the ground orientation. Sometimes you're working with somebody who would really like to reach out to others and they can't. They're just so self-reliant. I always do it myself. I push my way through. And then working with that person, and really, how do they reach to the other? How do they open into space? How do they use their sense organs to do that? You give them that, once again, that pre-movement, which is a way of being that allows something different, something that their being doesn't have, to emerge, and also changes movement. Caryn, what would you like to add to this?
I like to play with the imagination in terms of helping someone even begin to imagine their ears as capable of receiving information by imagining the ears starting to move, like an elephant moves an ear, or a deer. I mean, I live where there are lots of animals, so observing how creatures have mobile ears.
I felt that when you said that. It gave me a shiver all the way up and down.
To feel that kind of delicacy of, picking up what's going on, and then from there noticing, well, my right ear is hesitant to make that sense over here. And that's information that sometimes I can find with people, with clients or students, where they begin to notice that and have this capacity to find that shape of ear and begin to imagine or feel that the ear is open for business. If it's been shut down, it's open for the information that then can come in. So doing that, and also with the nose is or the eyes, that there's creatures that have very mobile or elongated, the snout of a dog or a wolf or a mammal, a quadruped, has lots of those little places to warm the air and to feel and to receive that air, that then can feel it as I'm evoking that in myself, imagining an awakening coming to my eyes and a softness. So, sometimes I start with the features of the different senses and making sound and using the tongue and the mouth and exploring the world in receiving the information of the world is very different if you do it through your nose, your eyes, your ears, your tongue, your mouth. So play with that sometimes to get in the territory, to be open to what one then notices about receiving information in a spatial way. And then, wow, I'm really curious about something I'm seeing over there, and feeling that elongation of my body to go achieve that sense of connection to whatever's out there that I feel awakened to.
And that's a really nice example of how it is, what are the, what are the images, what are the qualities that we give someone to help change the pre-movement. So it's not just listen, no, listen with your right ear. It's like, really, how would the ear move? How would it, how would it come up? How would it turn? How would it be receptive? And that quality of image, or the snout, that allows all those molecules of scent to come in, that is really the, that's a poetic, imaginative feeling quality that really gives us new information, that allows a new kind of movement to emerge, and a new kind of being to emerge with that movement. Do you want to say something about that? Do you have something to add to that, Kevin?
I would just say you've both brought up this way in which we're trying to support people's learning availability.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever we do with imagination, whatever kinds of setups that we do in our clinical practice, so much of it is about finding what is most available to people, so they're in friendly territory in terms of their internal experience. And I think a lot of the interviewing process is about learning what works for you. Tell me the things you enjoy. Tell me the things that are more playful for you. Tell me the times of your delight, because those are going to help me know what paths, what inroads might be there already. They're already practiced forms of imagination. We use this term that Caryn referred to, somatic imagination. And I think that's a great term because it differentiates the kind of imagination that we're wanting to invite people to learn and practice and enjoy. That's different than imagining what's on your grocery list, or imagining, what your child is doing at the moment. It's imagination that speaks to the wisdom of the body. And the reason it works for everybody when they stumble onto it is because the body's doing it already. I think one of you said that earlier on, that the sensory motor brain's job is to imagine and predict in a non-verbal way what's going on. So it's already doing it. That's why all the things that we invite people to learn as practitioners or just as clients want to join with what's already going on. And we do have particular, as you said, preferences, Lael, in terms of the places where we have negative haptic or, what he calls space neglect, phenomenological space neglect. We all have these differences. But what's working? We want to keep coming back to where's the resource, where's the capacity of the system, because there's got to be flow in the system for someone to show up for this. But it may be buried under all kinds of things at the representational brain layer, and we're interested in getting clues as to, oh, when we do experiments, it's informed by our observation of where this person is able to play, is able to have fun, is able to feel some flow in initiating with the experiment.
I noticed from this round that the word that's come is enrichment.
Yeah.
That this process of slowing down and becoming curious about ground and how I notice ground and space and how I notice that, this nourishing potential to enrich a process that's already functioning for us, but because of possibly our modern lifestyle, we don't get as much time in that enrichment program that can help us feel present, alive, awake to what we may need in relation to others, or what we may need from others in relation to ourselves.
Yes. I remember some years ago, the three of us were having a conversation about, what is it that really causes our movement and our being to change over the long term? And Kevin used a marvelous expression, which I've been borrowing from him ever since. He said, it is really working with movement over the long term is a persistent form of somatic prayer. And it really is about every day showing up for that enrichment, showing up for that juiciness, showing up for the place that you tend to not attend to, and giving it time, giving it space, giving it encouragement. Sometimes that's a minute, sometimes it's an hour, but just continuing to feed and enrich that. So now Caryn is going to lead us in a 15-minute exploration to help really give an embodied sense of what it is that we're talking about. So Caryn.
So take a minute to notice what you're noticing in your body right now in terms of your position. Where's down? And what tells you where down is? So I'm going to play with first this sense of down in terms of an exercise I call the 3 feet. So the first thing you're going to notice is the skin of your feet, and knowing that the skin of your feet in the little thickness in the bottom of the feet is this vast territory of receptors, all different kinds. And can you allow your feet to become your feet, and particularly the skin, to the texture and temperature of the surface that you're on? Maybe you're outside, Maybe you have a carpet. I have carpet underneath me. Maybe you have a floor. And your feet are now harvesting that information. And in harvesting, can you begin to notice more of your feet? That you have 10 toes, the map of your feet, the heel, the skin of your heel, the arches of your feet, can they begin to settle? So there's nothing micromanaged in your feet. All those 26 bones and all that padding of skin and tissue is resting and receiving the surface. And what I'd like you to do now, I invite you to raise your heels. And as you do that, see what happens to your toes. Do they shorten? Do they spread? And then bring your heels down, but don't abandon that sense of toes. So you have your whole footness, again, making contact with the ground. Okay, and this time we're going to practice a pre-movement to lifting the heels again, is to notice what activity happens in your feet when you think about lifting your heels. What do you feel in your feet? Do you feel your toes start to grip? Do you feel your foot start to tighten, or maybe your neck gets tighter? So slowly lift your heels again and let your toes grow longer, as if you're pouring water into all 10 toes and elongating the toes while you feel the seat that you're sitting on. And your toes just keep rolling out until they discover the whole surface of the ground that they're resting on. So whatever the room that you're in, that horizon, the foot horizon, and then slowly bring your heel down, but don't abandon your toes and the horizon of feet. Horizon being this flat surface that your feet are imagining and receiving the support from. Just be curious about that. Not only do you have the skin of your feet feeling that, but you can also then maybe begin to imagine pressing with your feet and notice that it's initiated at that skin place. So it's very gentle, and you'll see it, feel other things happening in your body, and then let it all go. And just run on your feet for a second and flop them. So you're kind of walking in place, lifting your knees up, and letting your voice shake as you do that. Make a sound. Okay, second feet. Second feet are, we can start with the ischial tuberosities on the bottom of the pelvis, where we're told to sit, take a walk forward and back on those two places on the bone. And the ischial tuberosities, those parts at the bottom of your pelvis, are connected to this long ramp that is called the rami. And that ramp is also offering itself for you to support you, is if you roll just a tiny bit forward in front of your ischial tuberosities, you have a big surface here. And that also is information that, if you can allow it, you feel the pubic bone drop, and you may feel more of a curve in your back. That's okay. Just experiment with what it's like to be on your sit bones, and then what it's like to roll off and stay in contact with that seat and feel that broader, the possibility of a broader sense of support. that can free your tail and your sacrum and your whole spine to have the support it needs to not have to hold so tightly in your torso somewhere. And then I'm noticing that all of a sudden, as I've done that, that I have more of a sense of the space that's available for my head to be in. Bless you, Lael. Good. Okay. So before we do the feet at the bottom of the skull, I do want to spend a little time, touch your hair and fluff it up. And if you don't have hair, then you touch your skull and the skin of your skull. And then rest your hands down on top of your thighs. And just feel the sensation from that contact. And begin to imagine, if you can, some kind of a headdress or a cap that gives you a little more height. Maybe you feel a cone coming up, a shape, and then do a micro movement of tickling the air from however inches, many inches you feel that. Yeah, just feel that. And if we keep it small enough, so very intrinsic parts of ourselves operate, and not having to do so much with maybe our neck or that tiny little movement, it can take us to the base of our skull where we have two more bits that stick out from the bottom, and that's the feet. The occipital condyles are two little processes at the bottom of the globe of the head. So if this is my head, then there's these 2 feet right at the bottom of the head. And you put that with your space above your head, and you have the option to do a pre-movement that starts with the tip or the sense of the headdress, allowing me to bow forward and open to the feet at the base of the skull and to the cervical vertebra a little bit more. So play with that gesture as if I'm bowing to Lael and Kevin in this space. But the sense of the space above my head is included and adding to the information of that length between head and tail. And then come back up. And notice what your experience in your body is now. Be curious. I'm noticing for me that as I come off of my ischial tuberosities and give more of my weight to the chair via the bottom of my whole pelvis, that there's less effort in my belly and my back. And there's this slight sense of, oh yeah, I'm free in my spine. So you want to take your 2 hands now and put them on your thighs and play with wiggling your spine for a minute. From the situation of the support of the feet that you feel and your rami, the bottom part of the ischial tuberosity extendors. And move your spine in some way that feels okay for you. Okay. And then you're resting your hands on your thighs, and let's be curious about the skin of your hands that's touching your tissue. And can you imagine and build in your imagination an extended sense of your hands joining your feet and the chair legs to become a quadruped? If that makes sense to you, is your hands are on your thighs, but you're letting them through the chair become legs that are supporting you, and once again, letting the head and the tail be differentiated from the hands and the feet, meaning they have a chance to function with the periphery being supported by ground, so that the space that's available to your head and to your tail is free to move and explore. Right. And then we're going to invite another pre-movement, which is to stand up. And if you think about standing up, notice there's so many adjustments that can start to happen. And you're just taking that in as you're feeling what pops up and noticing there's movement. And we're going to suspend that for a moment, and you're going to notice your headdress again and free your tail, because you really can yield into your seat of the chair. Spread your toes. You can adjust your feet enough that you feel comfortable, and you're going to stand for a minute. But the gesture is started with the movement of the perception of your headdress in the space, the sense of the ground is there through the skin of your feet that's touching. So you have something that's touching here and something that's facing here. And you're going to look out in the room and see what's there to stand into. And take a walk, just a little walk. Yeah. Okay, and then we also have an opportunity for a pre-movement when we sit down, is to reach with the tail and to reach with those ischial tuberosities and to feel the space of the knees and stay connected with the space to land. And we're going to spend one more moment here just harvesting the sensations, the thoughts, feelings you might have, questions and curiosities. Stay with the sensation in the feet, in the hands, with the sense of the head, the possibility of the tail being separate, be precise, different from your rama when you're sitting. Okay. Is that about the time, Lael? Yeah. Okay. We're going to come back in.
Thank you, Caryn. That was wonderful. In Brazil, the Indians, the Brazilian Amazonian Indians, they have headdresses with feathers that go out at all angles. And I imagined one of those when you said the headdress, and I got this incredible sense of tickling the air, like in a whole, the whole, all of this dimension. It was really cool. So yes, thank you both so much. This has been a delight, and a delight to see both of your faces and to share about this topic that is ongoing for all of us, and a lifelong exploration and discovery and work and joy.
Thank you, Lael.
Yes.
It's a delight to be with you and to have a reason to continue our conversation together.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and thank you for the day feels, I will proceed with my day in a very different way after being with you and having this conversation and having some time to move together.
Indeed, as will I, and as I hope will all our listeners.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.